Hi, PerspectaWeather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Monday, November 5th. Well, from time to time we like to take a look at the latest conditions on the sun here at PerspectaWeather.com. The sun, after all, in the long run is the main driver of all weather and climate here on Earth, and it is going through some interesting times indeed over the past several months, over the past several years. It is blank once again today. This is the 18th day in a row that the sun has been without sunspots. About 60% of the year has been without sunspots, and that's the highest total since the year 2009. 2009 was when we were experiencing a very deep solar minimum. In fact, it was the quietest time on the sun in more than a century, and all indications are that the solar minimum we are about to enter into right now very well could be as deep and quiet as the last one, perhaps even more so. So we are perhaps facing a historically quiet time here on the sun over the next year or two. And the low solar activity certainly has some ramifications. We'll talk about a couple natural consequences of a solar minimum here over the next several minutes. Well, before we get into the potential consequences of a deep solar minimum, let's kind of look back in time over the past few decades to see where this particular solar cycle, number 24, ranks compared to the previous few, and it's continuing a weakening trend in solar cycles since around 1980 or so, when solar cycle number 21 peaked back around 1980. Each of these solar cycles over the past several decades has had fewer and fewer sunspots, and this particular solar cycle, number 24, which we're ending right now, has been the weakest in more than a century. And again, the last solar minimum reached a bottom around 2009, right in this time period here, and we are currently right in this region right here, may have already entered the next solar minimum. Sometimes it's difficult to tell until after the fact, but certainly it's a possibility that we are already in the solar minimum, the next solar minimum phase. If not now, certainly during 2019 we will enter in this next solar minimum. And again, all indications are it will be a deep one, a long one, perhaps the quietest time on the sun in more than a century or so. And early indications of the next solar cycle, number 24, are that it indeed may continue this weakening trend in terms of number of sunspots during a particular solar cycle. Well, there are two natural consequences of a solar minimum that we like to talk about here today. This posting, these plots and graphs, by the way, on our weather website right now. We're just kind of walking through the latest posting with regard to the deep solar minimum. And the consequences we'd like to talk about are, first of all, the Earth's upper atmosphere in the layer known as the thermosphere has been cooling off dramatically, and that's a natural part of a solar minimum. But what is a little bit unusual is how cold it has gotten, and it looks like the Earth's thermosphere, which is about 50 miles above the Earth's surface and above that to the outer space, it looks like it could actually reach record cold levels that we haven't seen over the past several decades. First of all, we're talking again about this thermosphere, the top layer of the atmosphere, about 50 miles or so above the Earth's surface all the way to outer space. And again, it has been cooling off dramatically as we enter in this next solar minimum. Well, how do we know exactly how cold the upper part of the atmosphere has gotten, and perhaps how cold it will get over the next several months or so as we progress through this next solar minimum? Well, NASA has an instrument on board a satellite called the SABRE instrument, and it monitors infrared radiation from a couple different gases, carbon dioxide and nitric oxide, in that thermospheric layer. In fact, they have generated an index value called the Thermosphere Climate Index that will give us an idea, an ongoing, a daily kind of an update to what's going on in that particular part of the Earth's upper atmosphere, again by monitoring infrared radiation that comes from CO2 and NO, nitric oxide, in the upper part of the atmosphere. Using this particular data from the SABRE instrument that goes back 17 years or so, NASA has actually figured out a way to come up with this TCI, they call it the Thermosphere Climate Index, going back to the 1940s. And we are indeed very cold territory right now, and the solar minimum has either just begun or hasn't even begun yet, about to begin here. So it's very possible that we will reach a record low, a record cold in the upper part of the atmosphere, known as the thermosphere, according to this TCI, or Thermosphere Climate Index, that NASA has calculated. Well, here's the plot of the Thermosphere Climate Index from NASA, the TCI, going back to the 1940s. We're right in this region right here. Again, we have either just entered or about to enter a solar minimum phase, perhaps one of the quietest times on the sun in more than 100 years or so. And you can see already we're right around that area where it reached the bottom here, here, all these solar minimums going back to the 1940s. This is probably the record right here back in the 1950s or so. But again, over the next several months, it's entirely possible, according to NASA, that this Thermosphere Climate Index reaches a record low, meaning the coldest temperatures that we know of going back to the 1940s in that particular layer of the Earth's atmosphere known as the thermosphere. Well, not only is that one of the natural consequences of a solar minimum, the fact that the Earth's upper atmosphere cools, albeit now maybe to record cold levels here. Another natural consequence is the increase of cosmic rays, and we've discussed that periodically here at PerspectaWeather.com. During times of high activity on the sun, there's a strong solar wind. That solar wind actually keeps cosmic rays from entering into the solar system. With the weakening of the sun, the solar wind dies down, and that allows more of a penetration of cosmic rays into the solar system, into the Earth's upper atmosphere. SpaceWeather.com has led a project over the past few years to actually try to monitor the increase in cosmic rays as we exit the historically weak solar cycle 24 into the next solar minimum phase. And indeed, they have found through the release of some helium balloons way up in the upper part of the atmosphere that stratospheric radiation has indeed increased over the past several months. In fact, they've monitored this since March of 2015 across many areas in the U.S., and all this is reported at spaceweather.com. All these uptrends here in different parts of the country here represent an increase in stratospheric radiation at these particular areas across the country. And again, this is a natural consequence of exiting the solar maximum phase and winding down towards the next solar minimum. Cosmic ray increase has an impact, it is believed, on several other things. One of those of which is an increase in cloud cover, which in turn can have an impact on climate. Also, the increase in cosmic rays into the upper part of the Earth's atmosphere and into the solar system in general raises the threat of more radiation, a health risk for astronauts in space, and even airline passengers face an increased threat of some radiation in this kind of a time period when we're dealing with the increasing cosmic rays that penetrate into the solar system here. Finally, there's been some research done that actually has a connection between an increase in cosmic rays and an increase in lightning. And all of this is detailed in this particular posting that is on our homepage right now at PerspectaWeather.com. So a very interesting time on the sun. We are headed into perhaps a historically deep solar minimum, and some of the natural consequences are a cooling off of the Earth's upper atmosphere, which very well could reach record lows going back several decades according to NASA. And along with the cooling off in the thermosphere, cosmic rays are increasing and have been increasing for the past couple of years, and it looks like that trend may very well continue over the next several months. So we'll continue to monitor all of this over the weeks and months to come here as we enter in a deep solar minimum. That's it for now. For PerspectaWeather.com, I'm meteorologist Paul Dorian.